The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at Lima's Jorge Chavez International Airport as the royal aircraft touched down on Peruvian soil. Inside the plane, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, adjusted her lightweight blazer and checked her schedule one final time. This was not just another royal visit. This was the beginning of what would become one of the most memorable tours of her royal career. Sophie had been planning this South American adventure for months. The Foreign Office had suggested the trip as a way to strengthen diplomatic ties with three important Commonwealth and regional partners. But for Sophie, this journey represented something deeper. She wanted to connect with communities, understand their challenges, and showcase the incredible work being done by local organizations and British partnerships across Peru, Guatemala, and Belize. As the aircraft door opened, the warm Lima air rushed in, carrying with it the sense of the Pacific coast and the bustling energy of Peru's capital city. Sophie stepped onto the red carpet that had been rolled out for her arrival, her smile genuine and warm as she waved to the small crowd of officials and media representatives who had gathered to welcome her. The Duchess wore an elegant navy dress with traditional Peruvian textile accents, a thoughtful gesture that had been months in the planning. Her stylist had worked closely with local designers to ensure that every outfit during the tour would honor the culture she was visiting while maintaining the dignified appearance expected of a senior royal. Ambassador Patricia Losa stepped forward to greet Sophie with a warm handshake. The two women had corresponded extensively in preparation for this visit, and their mutual enthusiasm for the planned activities was immediately evident. "Your Royal Highness, welcome to Peru," Ambassador Losa said with a broad smile. "We are absolutely thrilled to have you here." Sophie's first stop was a surprise to many observers. Instead of heading directly to official government meetings or formal receptions, she had specifically requested to visit a women's cooperative in one of Lima's working-class neighborhoods. The motorcade wound through busy streets filled with colorful buses, street vendors, and the constant hum of city life that characterizes Peru's capital. The Miraflores Women's Textile Cooperative occupied a modest building that had been transformed into a vibrant workspace, where dozens of women created beautiful handicrafts using traditional Peruvian techniques passed down through generations. As Sophie entered the main workshop, the sound of conversation and laughter filled the air, along with the gentle clicking of knitting needles and the soft whir of sewing machines. Maria Gonzalez, the cooperative's founder, had been nervously preparing for this moment for weeks. A small, energetic woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and hands weathered by years of detailed craftwork, Maria had built this cooperative from nothing more than a dream and the determination to provide economic opportunities for women in her community. "Your Royal Highness," Maria said, her voice slightly trembling with emotion, "we are so honored that you chose to visit us. Please, let me show you what we do here." Sophie immediately put Maria at ease with her warm manner and genuine interest. "Please call me Sophie," she said with a smile. "I've been looking forward to this visit for months. I've heard incredible things about the work you're doing here." As they toured the workspace, Sophie stopped at each station to speak with the women about their craft. She watched as Carmen, a young mother of three, demonstrated the intricate alpaca wool weaving technique that had been taught to her by her grandmother. Sophie asked thoughtful questions about the patterns, the significance of the colors, and the time required to complete each piece. "This is absolutely beautiful work," Sophie said, examining an intricately woven scarf with traditional Andean patterns. "How long does it take to create something like this?" Carmen beamed with pride. "About 2 weeks, working a few hours each day. My grandmother taught me these patterns when I was very young. Each design tells a story about our history, our mountains, our way of life." Sophie spent nearly 2 hours at the cooperative, much longer than originally scheduled. She participated in a weaving demonstration, her initial awkward attempts drawing good-natured laughter from the women around her. "I think I need considerably more practice," Sophie joked as her thread tangled for the 3rd time. The women taught her a simple pattern, guiding her hands and explaining the technique with patience and warmth. By the end of the session, Sophie had managed to create a small section of colorful weaving that the cooperative members insisted she keep as a memento of her visit. But the most powerful moment came when Maria shared the story of how the cooperative had changed her community. Before this, many of us had no reliable income. We depended entirely on our husbands or struggled to find work that allowed us to care for our children. This cooperative gave us independence, dignity, and hope. Sophie listened intently as Maria explained how the cooperative had grown from 5 women meeting in her living room to over 60 members who now supported their families through their craft work. They had secured contracts with fair trade organizations around the world, including several partnerships with British companies that had helped expand their market reach. "We don't just make beautiful things here," Maria continued. "We build futures. We send our children to university. We buy homes. We support our elderly parents. Every stitch represents our dreams becoming reality." The visit concluded with a traditional ceremony where the women presented Sophie with a magnificent wall hanging they had created specifically for her visit. The piece incorporated symbols representing both British and Peruvian cultural elements, including roses for England and condors for Peru, all woven together in a design that symbolized friendship and cooperation between the two nations. As Sophie's motorcade prepared to leave for the next appointment, crowds had gathered along the streets. Word of her visit to the cooperative had spread quickly through social media, and many Lima residents had come out hoping to catch a glimpse of the Duchess. Sophie insisted on stopping several times to greet people, especially children who had been waiting patiently behind barriers. 8-year-old Isabella Morales had been holding a small bouquet of flowers for over an hour, hoping for a chance to present them to Sophie. When the Duchess approached, Isabella suddenly became shy and hid behind her mother's skirt. Sophie knelt down to Isabella's level and spoke to her gently in the few Spanish phrases she had been practicing. "Hola, Isabella. ¿Cómo estás?" Sophie said with a warm smile. Isabella's face lit up with surprise and delight. She stepped forward and presented her flowers with a small curtsy she had been practicing. "For you, princess," she said in careful English. Sophie accepted the flowers graciously and spent several minutes chatting with Isabella and her family. She asked about Isabella's school, her favorite subjects, and her dreams for the future. The little girl's mother later told reporters that this brief conversation had been the highlight of Isabella's year. The afternoon brought Sophie to Peru's National Museum, where she toured exhibits showcasing the country's rich pre-Columbian history. Dr. Carlos Mendez, the museum's director, personally guided her through galleries displaying artifacts from the Inca Empire, Moche civilization, and other ancient Peruvian cultures. Sophie showed particular interest in the textile exhibits, drawing connections between the ancient weaving traditions she was seeing and the contemporary work she had witnessed at the cooperative that morning. "It's remarkable how these techniques have been preserved and continue to thrive," she observed. "There's such a direct line from these ancient artisans to the women I met today." The museum visit included a special private viewing of recently discovered Inca artifacts that had not yet been displayed to the public. Sophie examined golden ceremonial vessels, intricately carved stone sculptures, and textile fragments that had been preserved for centuries in Peru's dry coastal climate. Dr. Mendez explained the significance of each piece, describing how new archaeological discoveries were constantly expanding understanding of Peru's ancient civilizations. "Every dig reveals new mysteries," he said. "We're still learning so much about how sophisticated these societies were." Sophie's genuine fascination with the historical artifacts led to an extended discussion about cultural preservation and the challenges facing archaeological sites around the world. She spoke knowledgeably about similar preservation efforts in Britain and suggested possibilities for future academic exchanges between British and Peruvian institutions. The evening brought Sophie to the residence of the British ambassador for a reception with prominent members of Lima's business, cultural, and academic communities. The guest list included successful entrepreneurs, university professors, artists, and leaders of nonprofit organizations working on issues ranging from environmental conservation to education reform. Sophie moved through the reception with practiced ease, engaging each guest in meaningful conversation. She spoke with environmentalist Dr. Ana Lucia Santos about efforts to protect the Amazon rainforest, discussing the global implications of deforestation and climate change. With business leader Ricardo Velasco, she explored opportunities for increased trade between Britain and Peru, particularly in sustainable industries. The highlight of the evening was Sophie's impromptu speech, delivered without notes and clearly from the heart. "I arrived in Peru this morning as a visitor," she began, "but after just one day, I feel like I'm among friends. The warmth, creativity, and resilience I've encountered today remind me why relationships between our nations matter so much." She went on to praise the Women's Cooperative, the museum's preservation work, and the innovative spirit she had observed throughout her first day in Lima. "Peru is not just preserving its past," she said, "it's building an extraordinary future, and Britain is honored to be part of that journey." The reception guests responded with enthusiastic applause, but more importantly, many approached Sophie afterward to continue conversations and share their own stories and projects. The evening extended well beyond its scheduled end time as Sophie continued to engage with guests who clearly appreciated her genuine interest in their work. As her first day in Peru concluded, Sophie returned to her hotel with a schedule adjustment for the following day. She had specifically requested to revisit the Women's Cooperative before leaving Lima, wanting to see their morning operations and meet with members who hadn't been present during her afternoon visit. This decision, though it complicated the carefully planned itinerary, perfectly captured Sophie's approach to royal duties. For her, these tours were not about checking boxes or fulfilling ceremonial obligations. They were about building real connections, understanding different perspectives, and finding ways to support meaningful work happening around the world. Her team worked late into the evening to accommodate the schedule change, coordinating with Peruvian officials and adjusting transportation arrangements. But everyone involved understood that these spontaneous moments often produce the most powerful and authentic experiences of any royal tour. Sophie spent her evening reviewing briefing materials for the next day's activities, which would take her beyond Lima to explore Peru's diverse landscapes and communities. She made notes about potential partnerships she wanted to explore further and connections she hoped to maintain long after the tour concluded. The first day of her South American adventure had exceeded all expectations. She had experienced the warmth of Peruvian hospitality, witnessed the creativity and determination of local communities, and begun building relationships that would extend far beyond her 9-day visit. As Lima settled into evening quiet around her hotel, Sophie reflected on the conversations and encounters that had filled her day. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new communities, and new opportunities to strengthen the bonds between Britain and the remarkable country she was visiting. The tour had only just begun, but already Sophie knew that this journey would be one she would remember for the rest of her life. The genuine connection she was making, the inspiring work she was witnessing, and the enthusiastic welcome she was receiving had created exactly the kind of meaningful diplomatic and cultural exchange that represented the best of royal tours. Peru had welcomed her with open arms, and she was eager to continue exploring all that this remarkable country had to offer. Dawn broke over the Andes Mountains as Sophie's helicopter lifted off from Lima, carrying her toward one of the most anticipated stops of her entire South American tour. Machu Picchu, the ancient Incan citadel that draws visitors from around the world, awaited her arrival. But this would not be a typical tourist visit. Sophie had specifically requested to meet with the archaeologists, conservationists, and local communities working to preserve and protect this UNESCO World Heritage Site. The flight itself provided breathtaking views of Peru's dramatic landscape. As the helicopter climbed higher, the sprawling urban expanse of Lima gave way to rugged mountains, deep valleys, and ancient terraces that still showed evidence of Incan agricultural engineering. Sophie pressed her face to the window, completely captivated by the scenery unfolding below. "It's absolutely incredible," she said to Dr. Patricia Alvarez, the lead archaeologist who was accompanying her on this portion of the tour. "You can see how the landscape itself tells the story of this civilization." Dr. Alvarez, a compact woman in her 40s with weathered hands and intense dark eyes, had spent the better part of 2 decades studying Incan sites throughout Peru. She had been somewhat nervous about serving as guide to British royalty, but Sophie's genuine enthusiasm and thoughtful questions quickly put her at ease. "What you're seeing now," Dr. Alvarez explained as they flew over ancient terraces carved into mountainsides, "represents some of the most sophisticated agricultural engineering in human history. These terraces prevented erosion, maximized water usage, and allowed crops to thrive at elevations where modern agriculture would struggle." The helicopter began its descent toward Aguas Calientes, the small town that serves as the gateway to Machu Picchu. Sophie could see the train tracks that brought thousands of visitors daily to this remote location, as well as the Urubamba River winding through the valley below. The scale of the landscape made human presence seem almost impossibly small. Upon landing, Sophie was greeted by local officials and members of the indigenous communities whose ancestors had built and inhabited these sacred mountains. Elder Miguel Quispe, a proud descendant of Incan nobility, stepped forward to welcome her with traditional blessings and a presentation of coca leaves considered sacred in Andean culture. "Alan Punchai, Mama," Miguel said in Quechua, offering the traditional greeting. Sophie had been coached in basic Quechua phrases and responded appropriately, drawing smiles of appreciation from the gathered community members. The ascent to Machu Picchu itself was made by bus along the winding mountain road that has carried millions of visitors to the ancient site. Sophie sat next to Miguel during the 20-minute journey, listening intently as he shared stories passed down through generations about the spiritual significance of the mountains and the sophisticated society that had thrived here centuries before European contact. "For my people," Miguel explained, "these mountains are alive. They are Apis, mountain spirits that protect and guide us." Machu Picchu was not just a city. It was a sacred place where our ancestors could commune directly with the divine. When the bus reached the entrance to the archaeological site, Sophie's first view of Machu Picchu left her momentarily speechless. The famous citadel spread out before her, its precisely fitted stone walls and terraces perfectly integrated into the dramatic mountain landscape. Clouds drifted between the peaks, occasionally obscuring and then revealing different sections of the ruins in constantly changing patterns of light and shadow. "My goodness," Sophie whispered, clearly moved by the sight. "Photographs simply cannot capture this." Dr. Alvarez led Sophie through the main sections of the site, explaining the purpose and significance of different structures. They explored the Intihuatana stone, believed to have been an astronomical clock, and examined the precision of construction techniques that had allowed these buildings to survive centuries of earthquakes and weather. Sophie showed particular interest in the agricultural terraces and water management systems that had made life possible in this remote mountain location. She asked detailed questions about how the Incans had transported materials to this isolated site, how they had achieved such precision in their stone cutting without metal tools, and how they had managed to create a sustainable community at such a challenging elevation. "The engineering knowledge represented here," Dr. Alvarez explained, "rivals anything being done in Europe at the same time period. In many ways, it surpassed contemporary European capabilities." But Sophie's most meaningful moments at Machu Picchu came during her interactions with the local guides and conservation workers who dedicate their lives to protecting this site. Carlos Mamani, a young man whose grandfather had worked as one of the first tourist guides at Machu Picchu, explained the challenges of balancing preservation with tourism. "Every day, thousands of people come here," Carlos said as he led Sophie through the sacred plaza. "They want to experience this wonder, and we want to share it with them. But we must also protect it for future generations. It's a constant balance. Sophie learned about innovative conservation techniques being developed to monitor and protect the site from the impacts of weather, seismic activity, and human traffic. She met with British and Peruvian researchers who were collaborating on projects using advanced technology to map and analyze the structures in ways that would have been impossible just a few years earlier. The highlight of her Machu Picchu visit was a private ceremony conducted by Miguel and other community elders in the Temple of the Sun. The ceremony, which included traditional music, prayers in Quechua, and offerings to the mountain spirits, was a profound spiritual experience that connected Sophie directly to the living culture that continues to honor the sacred site. This place changes everyone who visits it, Miguel told Sophie as they stood together looking out over the ruins toward the surrounding peaks. But you're the first royal visitor who has taken time to understand not just what our ancestors built, but why they built it and what it means to us today. Sophie's departure from Machu Picchu was delayed by nearly an hour because she insisted on meeting with every member of the conservation team and expressing her personal thanks for their work. She promised to explore ways that British institutions might support their ongoing research and preservation efforts. The helicopter journey back toward Lima took a different route, allowing Sophie to see additional archaeological sites and traditional communities scattered throughout the Sacred Valley. She made notes throughout the flight about potential collaborations and partnerships that could support both archaeological research and community development in the region. But the day's adventures were far from over. Instead of returning directly to Lima, Sophie's helicopter landed near the town of Pisac, famous for its traditional market and active indigenous community. Here, she would spend the afternoon with families who maintained traditional ways of life while adapting to the modern world. The Pisac market bustled with activity as vendors sold everything from fresh produce grown in mountain gardens to hand-woven textiles created using techniques unchanged for centuries. Sophie moved through the market stalls, stopping to speak with vendors and learn about their products and traditions. At a stall selling traditional medicines and herbs, she met Dona Rosa, an elderly Curandra traditional healer, who had been treating community members with plant-based remedies for over 50 years. Dona Rosa explained the medicinal properties of various plants growing in the high-altitude environment, many of which were being studied by modern pharmaceutical researchers. My grandmother taught me which plants heal which ailments, Dona Rosa explained through an interpreter. This knowledge has kept our community healthy for generations. Now scientists come to learn from us. Sophie was fascinated by the intersection of traditional knowledge and modern research. She learned about collaborative projects between international pharmaceutical companies and indigenous communities that ensured traditional healers were compensated and credited for their expertise. The market visit concluded with Sophie joining a family meal prepared by Maria Huaman and her extended family. The simple but delicious lunch featured quinoa soup, roasted guinea pig, a traditional Andean delicacy, fresh bread, and vegetables grown in the family's mountain garden. Initially, Sophie was a bit uncertain about the guinea pig, but she gamely tried everything offered to her. "It's actually quite tasty," she admitted with a laugh, drawing delighted responses from her hosts. "Much more flavorful than I expected." The family meal became an extended conversation about the challenges and opportunities facing traditional communities in modern Peru. Maria's children attended school in town, but also learned traditional farming and craft technique from their grandparents. The family was working to preserve their cultural heritage while ensuring their children had opportunities to succeed in contemporary society. "We don't want to live in the past," Maria explained, "but we also don't want to lose who we are. It's about finding balance." Sophie understood this challenge intimately from her own experience balancing royal traditions with modern responsibilities. She shared stories about how the British royal family worked to maintain meaningful traditions while adapting to contemporary expectations and social changes. As afternoon turned to evening, Sophie's final stop in the Sacred Valley was at a community school where local children learned both traditional Quechua culture and modern academic subjects. The school had been established through a partnership between the Peruvian government, international development organizations, and local communities. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 16, had prepared a special presentation for Sophie's visit. They performed traditional dances, demonstrated weaving techniques, and shared poetry written in both Quechua and Spanish. Sophie was particularly impressed by their bilingual abilities and their obvious pride in their cultural heritage. 10-year-old Amara Condori presented Sophie with a small woven bracelet she had made specifically for the visit. "I used the colors of both our flags," Amara explained in careful English. "So you will remember us when you return to your home." Sophie was clearly moved by the gift and the thoughtfulness behind it. She knelt down to Amara's level and promised to wear the bracelet throughout the rest of her tour. "This will help me carry a piece of Peru with me wherever I go," she told Amara. The school visit included a discussion with teachers about the challenges of providing quality education in remote mountain communities. Sophie learned about innovative programs using technology to connect rural students with educational resources in Lima and even internationally. As her helicopter prepared for the final flight back to Lima, Sophie spent a few minutes alone at an overlook providing a panoramic view of the Sacred Valley. The sun was setting behind the mountains, casting the landscape in golden light that highlighted the ancient terraces and traditional communities scattered throughout the valley. Dr. Alvarez joined her at the overlook. "What will you remember most about today?" she asked. Sophie considered the question carefully. "The continuity," she said finally, "the way this incredible ancient civilization lives on in the people I've met today. It's not just preserved in stones and artifacts, it's alive in the way people live, work, and relate to this landscape." The flight back to Lima provided time for Sophie to reflect on the extraordinary experiences of her second day in Peru. She had witnessed some of the most significant archaeological sites in the Americas, but more importantly, she had connected with a living culture that gives those sites their true meaning. Her conversations with community members, conservation workers, and cultural leaders have provided insights that would inform her understanding not just of Peru, but of the complex relationships between tradition and modernity that communities around the world were navigating. As the helicopter descended toward Lima's lights, Sophie was already looking forward to the next phase of her tour. Tomorrow would bring new adventures in Guatemala, but the connection she had made in Peru would remain with her long after the tour concluded. The day had reinforced her belief that the most meaningful diplomatic exchanges happened not in formal meetings or official ceremonies, but in authentic conversations with people living their daily lives while working to preserve their heritage and build better futures for their children. Peru had shown her the profound connections between past and present, between traditional wisdom and modern innovation, and between local communities and global understanding. These lessons would inform not just the rest of her tour, but her ongoing work as a senior member of the British royal family. The royal aircraft touched down at Guatemala City's La Flora International Airport under a brilliant morning sky, marking Sophie's transition from Peru to the second country of her ambitious 9-day tour. As she disembarked, the warm tropical air and vibrant energy of Guatemala immediately distinguished this arrival from her cool mountain departure from Lima just hours earlier. Guatemala's foreign minister, Dr. Claudia Ramirez, waited at the foot of the aircraft stairs with a delegation that perfectly represented the country's rich cultural diversity. Indigenous leaders wearing traditional hupil clothing stood alongside government officials in modern business attire, while a small group of children from local schools held colorful banners welcoming the Duchess to their homeland. Sophie had specifically requested that this arrival ceremony highlight Guatemala's indigenous heritage rather than following standard diplomatic protocol. As she stepped onto Guatemalan soil, she was greeted not with a military band, but with traditional marimba music performed by a group of musicians whose families have been creating this distinctive sound for generations. "Bienvenida a Guatemala, su Alteza Real," Minister Ramirez said with a warm smile, presenting Sophie with a beautiful jade necklace crafted by indigenous artisans. "We are honored to welcome you to the heart of the Maya world." Sophie examined the intricate jade work with obvious appreciation. "This is absolutely stunning," she said. "I understand jade holds special significance in Maya culture." "Indeed," replied Dr. Roberto Morales, director of Guatemala's National Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, who had joined the welcome delegation. For the ancient Maya, jade was more precious than gold. It represented life, fertility, and the eternal cycle of renewal. This conversation set the tone for what would be Sophie's most culturally immersive day of the entire tour. Rather than focusing primarily on government meetings or formal receptions, she had requested an itinerary that would allow her to experience contemporary Maya culture and understand how ancient traditions continue to thrive in modern Guatemala. The motorcade's first destination was Chichicastenango, a highland town famous for its massive indigenous market and its remarkable blend of Catholic and traditional Maya religious practices. The journey from Guatemala City climbed steadily into the mountains, providing spectacular views of volcanic peaks and terraced hillsides where Maya communities have cultivated corn, beans, and squash for over 1,000 years. Sophie traveled in a vehicle with Dr. Elena Yax, a Maya anthropologist who served as cultural advisor for the visit. Dr. Yax had grown up in a traditional Maya community before earning her doctorate from the University of California, and her perspective perfectly bridged the ancient and modern worlds that Sophie would experience throughout the day. "What you'll see in Chichicastenango," Dr. Yax explained as they wound through mountain roads, "is not a museum or a recreation. This is a living culture. The market operates exactly as it has for centuries, and the religious ceremonies you'll witness combine Catholic elements introduced by Spanish colonizers with Maya traditions that predate European contact by thousands of years." As they approached Chichicastenango, the famous market came into view, sprawling across the central plaza and surrounding streets in a riot of colors, sounds, and activity. Vendors from throughout the highlands had arrived before dawn to arrange displays of hand-woven textiles, carved wooden masks, fresh produce, traditional medicines, and countless other goods. Sophie's entrance into the market created a sensation, but not the overwhelming chaos that might have been expected. The market vendors and customers, many of whom had traveled for hours to participate in this weekly gathering, showed the respectful curiosity characteristic of Highland Maya culture. Children peeked shyly from behind their mothers' colorful skirts, while elderly vendors nodded politely as the Duchess passed their stalls. At a stall specializing in traditional hupel blouses, Sophie met Dona Carmen Zinico, a master weaver whose family had been creating these intricate garments for at least 6 generations. Each hupel displayed patterns specific to particular Maya communities with colors and designs that conveyed information about the wearer's village, family history, and social status. "Every thread tells a story," Dona Carmen explained through Dr. Yax's translation. "These patterns connect us to our ancestors and identify us to our people. When I weave, I am continuing a conversation that began long before I was born." Sophie examined the incredibly detailed work, asking questions about the significance of different symbols and the time required to complete each garment. She learned that a single hupel could take months to complete, with some of the most elaborate ceremonial pieces requiring over a year of daily work. "The dedication and skill this represents is extraordinary," Sophie observed. "In Britain, we have our own traditions of intricate textiles, but nothing quite as meaningful as this connection to ancestral knowledge and community identity." Dona Carmen beamed with pride at this recognition of her craft's significance. She invited Sophie to try her hand at the backstrap loom technique used to create hupel fabric, a complex process that requires years to master. Sophie's initial awkward attempts drew gentle laughter from the gathered crowd, but her persistence and good humor won immediate respect. The market tour continued with stops at stalls selling traditional Maya medicines, carved jade jewelry, and wooden masks used in ceremonial dances. At each location, Sophie engaged vendors in conversation about their products' cultural significance and the challenges of maintaining traditional crafts in a modern economy. But the day's most profound experience awaited at the Church of Santo Tomas, Chichicastenango's remarkable Catholic church, where Maya's spiritual practices have been incorporated into Christian worship for over 400 years. As Sophie approached the church, she could see smoke rising from incense burners on the front steps, where Maya's spiritual leaders conducted traditional ceremonies alongside Catholic Mass. Inside the church, the atmosphere was unlike anything Sophie had experienced in her extensive travels. Catholic saints shared altar space with symbols clearly derived from ancient Maya traditions. Families knelt on pine needles scattered across the floor, burning candles and copal incense while offering prayers in Kitch, the local Maya language. Father Miguel Sisse, the church's priest, had served this community for over 20 years and had become a bridge between Catholic doctrine and Maya spirituality. He explained to Sophie how the indigenous community had adapted Catholic practices to incorporate their ancestral beliefs, rather than abandoning them entirely. For our people, Father Sisse explained, the Christian God and the Maya creator spirits are different names for the same divine presence. Our ceremonies honor both traditions because both are part of who we are. Sophie witnessed a traditional Maya ceremony conducted by Don Pascual, a respected Ajkaje, Maya spiritual guide, who had inherited his role through family lineage stretching back to pre-Columbian times. The ceremony included the burning of specific combinations of incense, prayers offered in the 4 cardinal directions, and the consultation of ancient calendrical systems still used to guide agricultural and spiritual practices. These ceremonies connect us to the energy of our ancestors and the natural world, Don Pascual explained through translation. The Spanish tried to destroy our traditions, but we preserve them by weaving them together with the new religion they brought. Sophie participated respectfully in the ceremony, offering her own prayers for understanding and harmony between cultures. The experience clearly moved her, and she spent considerable time afterward discussing with Father Sisse and Don Pascual how different spiritual traditions could coexist and strengthen each other. The afternoon brought Sophie to a coffee cooperative in the mountains above Chichicastenango, where Maya farmers have organized to improve their economic prospects while maintaining traditional agricultural practices. The Cooperativa de Café Quiche represented over 300 small-scale farmers who had banded together to process and market their coffee directly to international buyers, eliminating exploitative middlemen and ensuring fair prices for their crops. Miguel Tum, the cooperative's president, had fought for years to establish this organization after watching his neighbors struggle to earn living wages from coffee cultivation. A soft-spoken man in his 50s who had taught himself business and marketing skills through online courses, Miguel represented the innovative spirit that was transforming rural Guatemala while respecting traditional values. For generations, my people grew excellent coffee, but received very little money for it, Miguel explained as he led Sophie through the cooperative's processing facility. Traders would come to our villages and pay whatever they chose. We had no choice but to accept. Sophie learned how the cooperative had changed this dynamic by investing in processing equipment that allowed them to prepare their coffee to international standards and market it directly to specialty coffee roasters around the world. Several British companies had become important customers, appreciating both the quality of the coffee and the cooperative's commitment to social and environmental sustainability. Now we control our own destiny, Miguel said with obvious pride. Our children go to school, our families have health care, and our communities are thriving. We did this ourselves, working together. Sophie toured the processing facility, observing every step from the arrival of fresh-picked coffee cherries to the final packaging of roasted beans ready for export. She met with farmers who explained their cultivation techniques, many of which incorporated traditional knowledge about soil management, plant nutrition, and pest control passed down through Maya agricultural traditions. The cooperative had also implemented environmental conservation practices that protected the highland forests surrounding their farms. Sophie walked through demonstration plots where coffee plants grew under shade trees that provided habitat for migrating birds and prevented soil erosion. Traditional Maya agriculture was always sustainable, explained Dr. Ana Morales, an agricultural extension agent working with the cooperative. These farmers understand better than anyone how to work with natural systems rather than against them. Modern sustainable agriculture is really just rediscovering ancient wisdom. Sophie's visit to the cooperative concluded with a traditional meal prepared by the farmers' wives using ingredients grown on their own land. The lunch featured fresh tortillas made from heirloom corn varieties, beans prepared with traditional herbs, vegetables from highland gardens, and, of course, the cooperative's excellent coffee. During the meal, Sophie listened to farmers describe their hopes for their children's futures. Many wanted their sons and daughters to receive good educations and have opportunities beyond agriculture, but they also hoped to preserve the cultural values and environmental knowledge that had sustained their communities for generations. "We don't want our children to be poor," said Esperanza Colosio, whose daughter was studying accounting at the university in Guatemala City. "But we also don't want them to forget who they are and where they come from." This conversation resonated deeply with Sophie, who understood from her own experience the challenges of maintaining cultural traditions while adapting to changing circumstances. She shared stories about how the British royal family worked to honor historical traditions while remaining relevant to contemporary society. As the afternoon progressed, Sophie's final stop in the Highlands was at a school where British and Guatemalan educators were collaborating on a bilingual education program that taught children in both Spanish and Kitsch while incorporating Maya cultural knowledge into the curriculum. The Escuela Billing Maya Ladina served children from both indigenous and mestizo families, working to bridge cultural divides while ensuring all students receive quality education. Sophie observed classes where children learned mathematics using traditional Maya calendars and vigesimal counting systems, studied science through investigation of traditional ecological knowledge, and practiced literacy in both Spanish and Kitsch. 12-year-old Ixcholage Pop presented Sophie with an essay she had written in Kitsch about the importance of preserving Maya languages. Through translation, Sophie learned that Ixchel dreamed of becoming a doctor, but also wanted to serve as a cultural bridge between her indigenous community and the broader Guatemalan society. "I want to help my people," Ixchel explained in careful Spanish, "but I don't want to lose my language or forget our traditions. This school shows me I can be both Maya and modern." Sophie spent considerable time with teachers and students learning about the challenges and successes of bilingual education. She was particularly impressed by the innovative curriculum that validated indigenous knowledge while preparing students for success in contemporary Guatemala. The drive back to Guatemala City provided time for reflection on the day's extraordinary experiences. Dr. Yax explained how the communities Sophie had visited represented broader trends throughout Maya regions of Guatemala, where indigenous peoples were asserting greater control over their economic and cultural futures while maintaining connections to ancestral traditions. "What you've seen today," Dr. Yax observed, "is cultural resilience in action. These communities survived colonization, civil war, and centuries of discrimination. Now, they're thriving on their own terms." Sophie's evening in Guatemala City brought a different perspective on the country's complexity. At a reception hosted by the British ambassador, she met with Guatemala's political and business leaders, many of whom represented the country's non-indigenous majority. The conversations revealed the ongoing challenges of building a truly inclusive society that honored indigenous rights while fostering national unity. But the most meaningful moment of the evening came when several of the day's participants, including Miguel from the coffee cooperative, Dr. Yax, and Father Cisse, joined the formal reception. Their presence transformed what might have been a conventional diplomatic gathering into a genuine dialogue between different sectors of Guatemalan society. Sophie's impromptu remarks at the reception focused on the strength she had witnessed in Guatemala's cultural diversity. "Today I've seen how ancient wisdom and modern innovation can work together to create something stronger than either could achieve alone," she said. Guatemala's Maya communities are not preserving the past at the expense of the future. They're using their heritage as a foundation for building a better tomorrow. As her second full day of the tour concluded, Sophie recognized that Guatemala had challenged and expanded her understanding of cultural preservation and adaptation. The Maya communities she had visited were not museum pieces or curiosities. They were vibrant, innovative societies that had found ways to thrive while maintaining their distinctive identities. The lessons from Guatemala would inform her final stop in Belize, where she would encounter yet another example of how diverse cultures could coexist and strengthen each other in the contemporary world. But tonight, she carried with her the images, conversations, and insights from a day spent in the heart of the Maya world, where ancient traditions continued to guide modern dreams. The small aircraft carrying Sophie from Guatemala City to Belize flew low over the Caribbean coastline, providing stunning views of the second-largest barrier reef in the world. As the plane descended toward Philip S.W. Goldson International Airport near Belize City, Sophie could see the brilliant turquoise waters that would play a central role in this final phase of her remarkable 9-day tour. Belize represented a homecoming of sorts for Sophie. As a Commonwealth realm where Queen Elizabeth II had served as head of state until her death, Belize maintained strong constitutional ties to Britain that went far beyond the diplomatic relationships Sophie had been building in Peru and Guatemala. Here, she would be welcomed not just as a distinguished visitor, but as a senior member of the royal family returning to Commonwealth territory. Governor General Froila Salom waited at the bottom of the aircraft steps, her presence symbolizing the unique relationship between Belize and the British Crown. A distinguished educator and the first indigenous woman to serve as Belize's head of state, Governor General Salom embodied the country's remarkable diversity and its ongoing evolution as an independent Caribbean nation. Your Royal Highness, welcome home to Belize, Governor General Salom said with a warm smile, using the traditional greeting that Commonwealth citizens offer to visiting royalty. We are absolutely delighted to have you here. The welcoming ceremony at the airport showcased Belize's incredible cultural richness. The Belize Defense Force Band played both the British national anthem and Belize's national anthem, while cultural groups representing the country's diverse ethnic communities, Creole, Garifuna, Maya, Mestizo, and others performed traditional music and dances. Sophie was particularly charmed by a group of Garifuna drummers whose complex rhythms reflected the African heritage of their ancestors, who had arrived in Belize via the Caribbean island of St. Vincent. The energy and precision of their performance created an infectious atmosphere that had everyone, including Sophie, moving to the beat. This music is absolutely captivating, Sophie said to Dr. Arima Bernardez, a Garifuna cultural leader who had helped organize the welcome ceremony. I can feel the history and passion in every rhythm. Dr. Bernardez beamed with pride. Our music carries the memory of our journey from Africa through the Caribbean to this coast, she explained. Every song tells our story of survival, adaptation, and celebration. Rather than proceeding immediately to formal meetings in Belize City, Sophie had specifically requested to begin her Belizean visit with a helicopter tour of the Belize Barrier Reef Reserve System, one of the most significant marine conservation areas in the Caribbean. The helicopter lifted off from Belize City and flew eastward over the coastal waters, providing aerial views of coral formations that stretched as far as the eye could see. Dr. James Martinez, Belize's leading marine biologist and director of the Belize Marine Protected Areas, accompanied Sophie on this aerial survey. From the helicopter, he pointed out different sections of the reef system and explained the conservation challenges facing this critical ecosystem. What you're seeing below us, Dr. Martinez said through the helicopter's intercom system, represents one of the most successful marine conservation stories in the Caribbean. 20 years ago, this reef system was severely threatened by overfishing, tourism pressure, and climate change. Today, it's thriving because of innovative partnerships between government, local communities, and international conservation organizations. The helicopter descended for a closer look at Half Moon Cay, a small island that serves as a critical nesting site for red-footed boobies and magnificent frigate. Sophie could see thousands of seabirds wheeling through the air and nesting in the island's mangrove forests. This island was almost destroyed by invasive species and uncontrolled development in the 1980s, Dr. Martinez explained. Now, it's one of our greatest conservation success stories. The bird populations have recovered dramatically, and the surrounding reef has become one of the healthiest sections of our entire system. The helicopter tour concluded with a landing at Lighthouse Reef Atoll, where Sophie would experience the famous Blue Hole, a massive underwater sinkhole that has become one of Belize's most iconic natural features. But rather than focusing on tourism potential, Sophie's visit highlighted the scientific research being conducted at this remarkable site. Marine biologists from the University of Belize, working in partnership with British and American researchers, had established a research station at Lighthouse Reef to study coral health, fish populations, and the impacts of climate change on Caribbean marine ecosystems. Sophie met with the research team and learned about their groundbreaking work on coral restoration and adaptation. Dr. Sarah Chan, a British marine biologist who had been working in Belize for 5 years, explained how traditional fishing communities had become partners in conservation efforts. The fishermen who have worked these waters for generations possess incredible knowledge about marine ecosystems, she said. Our research is most successful when we combine scientific methods with their traditional ecological knowledge. Sophie donned snorkeling gear and spent an hour exploring the reef with researchers who showed her both healthy coral formations and areas where restoration efforts were underway. The underwater experience was transformative for Sophie, who had never seen such a vibrant marine ecosystem up close. "It's like an underwater garden," she said after surfacing. "The colors and diversity are absolutely breathtaking. I had no idea that such a complex world existed beneath the surface." The research team showed Sophie innovative coral nursery techniques being used to grow heat-resistant coral varieties that could better survive rising ocean temperatures. Small coral fragments were being cultivated in underwater gardens before being transplanted to degraded reef areas. Climate change is the biggest threat facing coral reefs worldwide, Dr. Chin explained. But here in Belize, we're developing techniques that could help reefs around the world adapt and survive. Sophie's afternoon brought her back to the mainland for visits with coastal communities that had transformed their relationship with marine resources from exploitation to stewardship. In the fishing village of Sardanija, she met with members of a community-based conservation organization that had established the first community-managed marine protected area in Belize. The Sardanija Alliance for Research and Development had grown from a small group of concerned fishermen into a sophisticated organization that balanced conservation goals with community economic needs. Sophie toured their visitor center, which showcased the marine life of the nearby Corozal Bay Wildlife Sanctuary and provided environmental education for local schools. Roberto Pott, president of the Sardanija Alliance, had been fishing these waters for over 30 years and had witnessed dramatic changes in marine ecosystems during his lifetime. "When I was young, you could catch fish anywhere," he told Sophie. But by the 1990s, many species were disappearing. "We realized we had to change our approach or lose everything." Sophie learned how the fishing community had worked with marine biologists to establish fishing quotas, seasonal restrictions, and no-take zones that allowed fish populations to recover. The results had been dramatic. Both fish populations and fishermen's incomes had increased significantly over the past decade. Conservation and community prosperity can work together, Roberto explained as he showed Sophie through the organization's fish processing facility. "When we protect the reef protects us." The most inspiring part of Sophie's visit to Sardanija was her time with local students who had been trained as junior marine guides. These teenagers, ranging in age from 14 to 18, conducted tours for visitors and helped monitor marine life in the sanctuary. 16-year-old Maria Cannell had grown up in Sardanija and planned to study marine biology at the University of Belize. She guided Sophie through the mangrove creeks surrounding the village, pointing out manatees, crocodiles, and hundreds of bird species that depended on this coastal ecosystem. My grandfather was a fisherman. My father is a fisherman. And I want to work with the ocean too, Maria explained as she navigated their small boat through the winding waterways. But I want to do it in a way that ensures my children will still have these amazing creatures to see. Sophie was impressed by Maria's knowledge and passion for marine conservation. The young woman could identify dozens of bird species, explain the ecological relationships between different marine habitats, and articulate complex conservation concepts with remarkable clarity. As the afternoon progressed, Sophie's final major stop in Belize brought her to the country's interior for a visit with Maya communities that were pioneering community-based ecotourism as an alternative to traditional slash-and-burn agriculture. The village of San Jose offered a striking example of how indigenous communities could preserve their cultural traditions while generating sustainable income from their natural resources. The village had established partnerships with international conservation organizations to protect surrounding rainforest areas while developing carefully managed tourism programs that allowed visitors to experience Maya culture and pristine tropical ecosystems. Sophie was welcomed with traditional Maya ceremonies and invited to participate in cultural activities that demonstrated the community's sophisticated understanding of forest ecology. Village leader Don Eligio Panti, a traditional Maya healer whose knowledge of medicinal plants had attracted attention from international pharmaceutical researchers, explained how the community had balanced conservation with development. Our ancestors understood that the forest provides everything we need if we treat it with respect, he said. Tourism allows us to share this wisdom while protecting our home. Sophie participated in a traditional plant walk where Don Eligio identified dozens of species used in Maya medicine and explained their applications for treating various ailments. She learned about sustainable harvesting techniques that ensured medicinal plants continued to thrive in their natural habitat. The knowledge preserved in communities like this, Sophie observed, represents centuries of careful observation and experimentation. It's an invaluable contribution to global understanding of natural medicine and sustainable living. The village visit included demonstrations of traditional Maya crafts, including chocolate making using cacao grown in forest gardens, and weaving techniques that created beautiful textiles from plant fibers. Sophie tried her hand at grinding cacao beans and helped prepare traditional Maya hot chocolate flavored with local spices. Evening found Sophie back in Belize City for a reception at the Governor General's residence, where she met with leaders from across Belizean society. The guest list included government ministers, business leaders, educators, environmental activists, and representatives from the country's diverse ethnic communities. The reception provided an opportunity for Sophie to reflect on the remarkable diversity she had encountered during her day in Belize. From marine conservation efforts that combined cutting-edge science with traditional knowledge, to indigenous communities that had found innovative ways to preserve their culture while protecting their environment, Belize had demonstrated creative approaches to sustainable development that could serve as models for other small nations. During her remarks at the reception, Sophie praised Belize's leadership in conservation and cultural preservation. Belize proves that small countries can have enormous impact when they commit to protecting their natural and cultural heritage, she said. The innovations I've witnessed here today offer hope for communities around the world facing similar challenges. The evening's most memorable moment came when representatives from all the communities Sophie had visited during her Belizean tour presented her with gifts that symbolized their respective conservation and cultural achievements. Maria from Sardinia presented a piece of coral art created from naturally shed coral fragments. The Maya community offered a traditional wooden mask representing forest spirits, and the Garifuna drummers performed a special composition created specifically for Sophie's visit. Governor General Salem concluded the evening by presenting Sophie with the Order of Belize, the country's highest honor, in recognition of her commitment to strengthening Commonwealth relationships and supporting conservation efforts throughout the Caribbean region. Your Royal Highness, Governor General Salem said during the presentation ceremony, Your visit has highlighted the best of what Belize represents. Our commitment to protecting our natural heritage, preserving our cultural diversity, and building a sustainable future for all our people. Sophie's final night in Belize was spent reviewing the extraordinary experiences of her three-country tour. From the mountains of Peru through the highlands of Guatemala to the Caribbean coast of Belize, she had witnessed innovative approaches to cultural preservation, environmental conservation, and community development that challenged conventional thinking about development and progress. The communities she had visited were not simply maintaining traditional ways of life. They were adapting their ancestral knowledge to address contemporary challenges while preserving their distinctive identities. Whether it was Maya farmers in Guatemala marketing their coffee directly to international buyers, Peruvian women creating economic opportunities through traditional crafts, or Belizean fishing communities becoming leaders in marine conservation, Sophie had seen how cultural authenticity and modern innovation could work together to create sustainable prosperity. As she prepared for her departure the following morning, Sophie recognized that this tour had been far more than a diplomatic exercise. It had been an education in the creative potential that emerged when communities were empowered to control their own destinies while maintaining connections to their cultural roots and natural environments. The final day of her tour would bring one last set of experiences that would complete her understanding of how small nations and traditional communities were pioneering solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges. But tonight, surrounded by the sounds of the Caribbean night, Sophie carried with her a renewed appreciation for the wisdom that emerged when people honored both their heritage and their hopes for the future. Dawn broke over Belize City with the sound of tropical birds and the gentle lapping of Caribbean waves against the shore. Sophie's final day in Central America had arrived, but rather than rushing to fulfill formal departure protocols, she had specifically requested one last series of encounters that would complete her understanding of the remarkable journey she had undertaken over the past 9 days. The morning began with a private breakfast at the Governor General's residence, where Sophie was joined by several young people from across Belize who represented the future leaders she had met during her visit. Maria Cannell from Sardinia, who had guided her through the mangrove waters, sat beside Joaquin Chock, a Maya University student studying sustainable agriculture who had participated in yesterday's village visit. Also present were David Garbut, a Creole teenager from Belize City who was developing urban conservation projects, and Keisha Martinez, a Garifuna student who was documenting traditional music and dance to preserve her cultural heritage. These young Belizeans had specifically asked for an opportunity to share their dreams and concerns with Sophie before her departure. We wanted you to understand that everything you've seen during your visit, the conservation work, the cultural preservation, the community development, it's all about creating a better future for us and our children, Maria explained as the group shared a traditional Belizean breakfast of fried jacks, refried beans, and fresh tropical fruits. Sophie listened intently as each young person described their aspirations and the challenges they faced. Despite their diverse backgrounds, common themes emerged: a desire to honor their cultural heritage while participating in the global economy, concerns about climate change and environmental degradation, and hopes for education and opportunities that would allow them to contribute to their community's development. What strikes me most, Sophie observed, is how clearly you understand that your individual success is connected to your community's well-being and environmental health. That perspective could teach the world a great deal. Joaquin shared his plans to return to his Maya village after completing his agricultural studies, bringing modern techniques that could improve crop yields while maintaining traditional ecological practices. My grandfather taught me that the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land, he said. I want to use my education to prove that traditional farming methods can feed our families and protect our environment better than industrial agriculture. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, far beyond the originally scheduled time. Sophie was fascinated by these young people's sophisticated understanding of global challenges and their innovative ideas for addressing them through community-based solutions. Before leaving the Governor General's residence, Sophie made a commitment that surprised everyone present. I want to establish ongoing connections between British educational institutions and the communities I've visited during this tour, she announced. These aren't just polite words. I'm going to work to create real partnerships that support your dreams and share your innovations with the world. She specifically mentioned possibilities for exchange programs, research collaborations, and funding opportunities that could support conservation and cultural preservation projects. More importantly, she promised that this would not be a one-time visit, but the beginning of sustained relationships. Sophie's motorcade traveled through Belize City one final time, but with an unscheduled stop that perfectly captured the spirit of her entire tour. Word had spread through social media that the Duchess was departing that morning, and hundreds of Belizeans had gathered along the route to wave goodbye. Rather than simply waving from her vehicle, Sophie asked the motorcade to stop so she could walk among the crowds and personally thank people for their hospitality. What was planned as a brief farewell became an extended celebration as Sophie moved through the gathered crowds, accepting flowers, handmade gifts, and countless expressions of appreciation. 8-year-old Joshua Williams, dressed in a school uniform, had been waiting since dawn to present Sophie with a drawing he had made of the blue hole surrounded by sea creatures and British and Belizean flags. "I want to be a marine biologist like the people you met yesterday," Joshua told Sophie with serious determination. Sophie knelt to Joshua's level and spent several minutes discussing his drawing and his dreams. "You know, Joshua, Belize needs young people like you to protect these amazing marine environments," she said. "I hope you'll pursue that dream and help teach the world about the incredible life in your ocean." The impromptu street celebration continued for nearly an hour, with Sophie meeting families, students, fishermen, teachers, and community leaders who had come to express their appreciation for her genuine interest in their country and communities. Many shared stories about the positive changes they had witnessed in their own villages and neighborhoods through conservation and cultural preservation efforts. Finally, the motorcade resumed its journey to the airport, but the extended farewell had created exactly the kind of authentic connection that had characterized Sophie's entire tour. She waved from her vehicle as children ran alongside, and the memory of their enthusiasm and hope would remain with her long after she returned to Britain. At Philip S.W. Goldson International Airport, Sophie's departure ceremony was deliberately modest, focusing on substance rather than pageantry. Governor General Salem presented her with letters from each of the communities she had visited, containing commitments to continue the conservation and cultural preservation work that had impressed her so deeply. But the most significant moment came when Dr. Martinez, the marine biologist who had guided her reef tour, presented Sophie with a detailed proposal for a Caribbean marine conservation initiative that would link British and Caribbean institutions in ongoing research and protection efforts. "Your visit has inspired us to think bigger about what we can accomplish together," Dr. Martinez explained. This proposal outlines how British expertise and Caribbean knowledge could combine to create one of the world's most effective marine conservation programs. Sophie studied the proposal with obvious interest. "This is exactly the kind of partnership I had hoped might emerge from this tour," she said. "I want to ensure this receives serious consideration from the appropriate British institutions." As her aircraft prepared for departure, Sophie took a few minutes to walk alone across the tarmac, looking back toward the mainland where the mountains of Central America rose in the distance. Over 9 days, she had traveled from the high peaks of the Andes to the coral reefs of the Caribbean, experiencing cultures, communities, and conservation efforts that had challenged and expanded her understanding of sustainable development. The aircraft lifted off over the turquoise waters of the Caribbean, providing one final aerial view of the Belize Barrier Reef that had so impressed Sophie during her helicopter tour. As the coral formations disappeared behind them and the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, Sophie began the process of reflecting on all she had experienced and learned. During the long flight back to London, Sophie worked on detailed notes that would inform her upcoming reports to British government officials, conservation organizations, and educational institutions. But more importantly, she began planning how to maintain the relationships and commitments she had made during her tour. She drafted personal letters to many of the individuals she had met, from the textile cooperative members in Lima to the Maya healers in Belize. Each letter contained specific commitments for ongoing support and collaboration rather than generic expressions of appreciation. Sophie also began developing proposals for new initiatives that could emerge from her tour experiences. These included possibilities for student exchange programs between British universities and institutions in Peru, Guatemala, and Belize, research partnerships focusing on traditional ecological knowledge, and support for community-based conservation efforts. Perhaps most significantly, Sophie began planning a follow-up conference that would bring together representatives from all the communities she had visited to share their experiences and learn from each other's innovations. The real value of this tour, she wrote in her notes, will be measured not by the diplomatic headlines it generates, but by the lasting partnerships it creates. The aircraft's path took it over the Gulf of Mexico and across the Atlantic, retracing in reverse the route that had brought Sophie to this transformative experience 9 days earlier. But the woman returning to London was different from the one who had departed. She carried with her not just memories and souvenirs, but a transformed understanding of how traditional communities were pioneering solutions to global challenges. As Britain's coastline came into view, Sophie reviewed the commitments she had made during her tour. She had promised to explore funding for the Peruvian Women's Textile Cooperative, to investigate research partnerships between British and Guatemalan institutions studying Maya agriculture, and to support the Caribbean Marine Conservation Initiative that Dr. Martinez had proposed. More broadly, she had committed to using her platform as a senior royal to highlight the innovative work being done by indigenous and traditional communities in addressing climate change, cultural preservation, and sustainable development. These weren't abstract policy issues. They were the life work of people she had met and communities she had visited. Landing at London Heathrow brought Sophie back to familiar territory, but she carried with her the voices, faces, and stories of the hundreds of people who had welcomed her during her South American and Central American adventure. The ceremonial aspects of the tour, the formal receptions, official meetings, and diplomatic protocols had been successful, but the real value lay in the authentic human connection she had made. In her first interview after returning to Britain, Sophie reflected on the tour's significance. "I went to Peru, Guatemala, and Belize expecting to learn about different cultures and conservation efforts," she said. "What I discovered was that these communities are developing solutions that could benefit the entire world. They're not preserving the past at the expense of the future. They're using their heritage as a foundation for innovation." She emphasized that the tour had reinforced her belief that sustainable development required combining traditional knowledge with modern technology, community empowerment with global cooperation, and cultural authenticity with economic opportunity. The real measure of the tour's success would become apparent in the months and years that followed, as the relationships Sophie had built began generating concrete partnerships and initiatives. The textile cooperative in Lima would establish direct trade relationships with British retailers. Maya agricultural techniques would be studied by British universities, and marine conservation methods developed in Belize would be adapted for use in British coastal waters. But perhaps most importantly, the young people Sophie had met, Maria in Belize, Amara in Peru, Ixchel in Guatemala, and dozens of others, would maintain connections with British institutions that supported their education and community development work. Sophie's 9-day tour had demonstrated that royal visits could be transformative experiences that generated lasting benefits for all participants. By focusing on authentic engagement rather than ceremonial obligations, by prioritizing community voices over government protocols, and by making concrete commitments rather than offering diplomatic pleasantries, she had created a model for how international relationships could support sustainable development and cultural preservation. As she settled back into her regular duties in Britain, Sophie carried with her the knowledge that across 3 countries in Central and South America, communities continued their remarkable work of honoring their heritage while building better futures. And she carried the responsibility of ensuring that the partnerships she had promised would flourish long after the headlines from her tour had faded. The bracelet that young Amara had woven for her in Peru remained on her wrist, a daily reminder of the connection she had made and the commitments she had undertaken. Every time she looked at it, she remembered Amara's words. "So you will remember us when you return to your home." Sophie had indeed remembered, and she would continue to remember, not just as a visitor who had passed through their communities, but as a partner in their ongoing efforts to create a more sustainable and equitable world.